You have all these standards and you have all these things that you wrote down that are super important to you that you're not going to compromise on. They might have those things too. And so what are you bringing to the table? Because any person that is worth you spending your life with is worth getting the best version of who you are.
Hi, welcome to Wild and Beautiful. We're Joanna Hyatt and Lauren Enriquez, your co-hosts who every week are helping you live out your faith in a way that's biblically rooted but culturally relevant.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Wild and Beautiful. I'm still your guest host, Kyle. For those of you that have been sticking around for these episodes, really appreciate it. I was able to talk to Lauren and Joe about this week's episode, and I put together a lot of my own notes, and then they sent over a few things that they have been thinking about recently and some conversations that they'd had. And I put those in as well. So you'll be getting what I hope is a great episode on dating and relationships. And so they haven't heard my notes, though, for this episode. So if you have any, opinions or concerns or criticisms, just know that they're my thoughts and not Lauren and Joe's. And if you want to reach out and interact with any of us about this episode, please do. Having said that, I'm not going to do a scripture reading this week. I just wanted to kind of get into it and be a little bit more conversational and just speak a little bit more from the heart about, my opinions about dating and relationships based on my experience. Also based on, my faith and the things that I have learned from scripture and from interacting with the gospel. And so I'm sure that, a number of you will probably agree and there'll be a lot of overlap. So I hope that there is a lot of encouragement, but also some thought-provoking things. And if you are looking to date or be in a relationship, hopefully this is something that you can kind of take with you. I'll start by giving you a little bit of backstory, just like on my dating life and marriage, so you have some context. My wife and I met, and through our church, we, had a lot of mutual friends, and we met, started dated for about a year and a half before we got engaged. And then we were engaged for about 8 months. And then we got married in October of 2013. And our marriage has definitely had its fair share of ups and downs. It started okay in terms of, just kind of how I was engaging and how present and available I was. And I was a pretty self-centered person, and it was hard for me to learn how to care for someone else the way that I cared about myself. Which is ironic because the type of things that I've struggled with through my adult life would indicate that I actually have had a very low opinion of myself. But we've worked through that. Our marriage, I would say, went from okay to unbelievably difficult. To great. And I think, are in such an amazing place. And Joanna knows a decent amount about just like mine and Amanda's relationship and our marriage. And, I think that she would say it's really crazy kind of thinking of the things that we've gone through. But I'm being vague on purpose just to respect my wife's privacy and just the things that, she probably wants to take some time thinking about how she would like to introduce it to people and start opening up about and talking about, because it's definitely something that I feel like would be really helpful for people to hear about, just because it is something that is, I think, a lot more common than people think. But I will say that, my wife and I are both believers, and we are in a very happy marriage and relationship. And it wasn't always like that. That doesn't mean that we didn't always love each other and that we didn't want to get married, but marriage is really hard because people are broken, and, broken people happen to get married. My wife definitely has her own things that she has admitted to wanting to work on and be better about. But a lot of it was stuff that I brought to the table that I was unwilling to deal with before I got married. And marriage doesn't solve your problems. It magnifies them, believe it or not. So your spouse is not just a coverall for things you dealt with when you were single. They either turn into someone that helps you overcome those struggles if you open up about it, or they turn into someone that you hide your struggles from because you're ashamed and you don't want to admit it to them, or maybe you don't want to be held accountable. But either way, if you are struggling with something as a single person, or if you're dating and you have not started talking to your person that you're dating about certain things that you're dealing with in your life yet, just know that marriage isn't going to make them go away. So, so that's like a little bit of context about like my relationship and my marriage. We've been through quite a lot, but our marriage is what I think both of us would describe as great. And we, have a lot of really amazing conversations, and there's some stuff that we do that kind of help us stay in check with one another that I'll reference here in a little bit and tell you guys more about in more detail. But moving on from that, I know that there's scripture talking about being equally yoked and talking about the importance of being with other believers, in romantic relationships and in friendships and things like that. There's a lot of scripture about that, and I encourage you all to spend time reading through those. But again, like I mentioned earlier, I just kind of want to be a little bit more conversational this week. So a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, I think are pretty universal, but as believers, we definitely have a few nuances in how we arrange our reasons for dating and maintaining relationships. And so I definitely want to try and touch on it from both sides, So let me get into my actual notes now. Let me start my actual notes by saying this. I want to preface the episode with this right here. You have inherent value as a person. Regardless of what you or someone else believes, you're not defined by your relationship or what you think others want from you. You matter. And you have a purpose, and you have beauty, and you have value because you were made in God's image, and He defines your worth. And if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, that's okay. You still have value, and you deserve respect, and you deserve love, and you deserve to be taken seriously in your relationships. So don't let someone else define your worth by making you believe you have to conform to what makes them comfortable. Yes, you should be willing to compromise, and like we'll get to that later in the episode, but I'm talking about fundamentals, who you are and where your value comes from. If you're secure in that, chances are you won't go looking for it in other places, and especially in relationships that don't bring value or joy to your life. So I just wanted to begin by kind of like laying the foundation of like all the things that I'm going to talk about get a lot more difficult to deal with if you're struggling with where your value comes from as an individual. And there's a lot of really great places that your value can come from. If you're not a believer, there's a lot of really there's a lot of really meaningful things in our life where we can, gain value from, and we can orient our lives around. And I think that that's okay. But I think a lot of you are here because you are believers. I'm a believer, and we believe that our value comes from Jesus and from Scripture and from the things that we have learned about what the gospel is, about who God is, about the nature of God, and what He says about us. And so, I will definitely say that I want to leave space for people who are not believers and let you know that you're not excluded from any of these things. But a lot of you, I think, are believers. And so I definitely want to reinforce that. So kind of getting into the meat of it, there's a lot of hypocrisy in dating. And so many people don't think that they have to be accountable to the standards that they hold others to. So Lauren and Joe both sent me some audio messages in our text group about this episode. I'll start with touching on the one that Lauren sent over. So she sent over an audio message about kind of the extremes in like women's and men's entitlements and just the conversation around like body counts and things like that. And I didn't make any bullet points about this in my notes because I wanted to just kind of like speak off the cuff about it. I think that it's ridiculous to excuse yourself from a standard that you're holding to someone else, especially in the context of a relationship. It needs to be equal, and it needs to be something that you are both willing to put equal effort into because you both bring something to the table. The entitlement aspect is, there's a lot of women and men out there and people of all kinds that feel very entitled to the type of person that they should end up with without putting any effort at all into themselves and what they're bringing to the table and what they're giving to the other person. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think any relationship can be set up to sustain in that way if that's how you're going about it. And I also just think it's really unfair. So yeah, I guess I'll definitely get more into accountability later in the episode. So I guess I'll save what I was going to say until later, because I definitely spent time putting it in my notes, and what I have to say about it later is better than what I would try and conjure up in the moment right now. So I'll stick to my notes as we get through that. She did make mention of, there are a lot of conversations about body counts, about how, if you're unfamiliar with the term, don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, but I also don't want to assume that you're a part of every single conversation in pop culture and society and familiar with all aspects of terminology. So, essentially just how many sexual partners you've had, how many people you've slept with. And there's a lot of emphasis right now on, how many partners women have had, and almost no conversation about the amount of partners that men have had, because I think that there are a lot of people in society that are trying to lead us to believe that, a man's sexual journey is perfectly fine and they are entitled to that. And it doesn't matter when they do end up getting into the relationship that they're going to be in long term. And everything about a woman's sexual journey matters, as specifically to her spouse or future partner that she's going to be with long term, and the amount of people that she has been with matter. And, it's this huge deal. And so I think that it's really unfair to put those things on different pedestals, as if one's more important than the other or one's less important than the other. I will say, as a Christian, yeah, you should be trying to find someone who is similar to you, so that y'all can relate the best to one another. But that doesn't mean that you can't be with someone that has had sexual partners, even as a believer. There's a lot of opinions about that. My personal opinion is that, if you believe that it's sinful, then sin is sin. We are all broken people and we've all done things. And that doesn't mean that we don't deserve to be in healthy and meaningful relationships. And if we are believers, and we're choosing to engage as believers with one another, and to engage with the gospel and to what we think God has in store for our lives, then yeah, if God forgives us for the things that we've done and we're actively seeking atonement and moving forward, then our partner should respond the same way. That doesn't mean that there can't be conversations about it, and that definitely doesn't mean that it won't affect your relationship in one way or another. But yeah, I think it'd be really unfair for you to want to date someone and then find out that they have had, a sexual history in their past, and then that make it to where you don't want to be with them. Everybody's situation is different, and I'm not going to try and tell you what you should do. I think that you should spend time in prayer, spend time talking to people in your life that you trust, and just consider what it would mean for you to be in that relationship or for you to not be in that relationship. So there's probably a more eloquent way to answer that. Lauren would probably definitely have a way better answer to that. But this is kind of my thoughts in the moment. And by the way, back to the body count thing, if you're a guy who's sleeping around and it somehow matters to you how many partners your girlfriend has had, you're total hypocrite. And vice versa. If you're a girl and you're sleeping around a lot, and that's fine for you, but you somehow have an opinion on how many partners, the guy that you end up with should have had, also pretty hypocritical. So I'll say this: if you're believers, yeah, you kind of know how you need to be approaching that and interacting with it. The Bible's pretty clear on calling people who are not married to abstain from sex. If you're not a believer, I just think it's a really unhealthy way to approach your relationships and your standards. So if you have any questions or comments about that in particular, please reach out. If I had a bad take, let me know. I want to learn and I want to grow and I want to hear what other people think. So if you feel like I'm thinking about it a little differently and you want to let me know your perspective, definitely. I want to know that. I'm open to that. So so that's kind of my response to that. We can make that an ongoing conversation if you want. But moving forward, in my notes, my next point that I had was just a question, which was, what are you looking for in a potential partner? So this obviously would be speaking to people who are single. What are important qualities to you as an individual and as a person of faith? And what are your deal breakers? These are things that I think you should be interacting with regularly. You should be thinking about them, and you should be willing to be flexible on some of them, depending on the situation and who you meet, things like that. Some things are hard and fast, and a standard and concrete, and you shouldn't break on them, shouldn't move on them. Other things, it's okay to be flexible on. So spend time with that. I will say, I hate to break it to you, but being tall is not a quality that I would consider to be very important. I see a lot of emphasis put on this lately on, a lot of women, especially online that I've seen, put a lot of emphasis on, being with tall guys. And I will just say that every tall guy you've dated clearly hasn't been the one, or you'd be married. So maybe reconsider broadening your physical boundaries for a partner and focus on who they are from the inside out. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have a physical type or that attraction isn't important, but categorically eliminating an entire type of person from the dating pool simply because they don't meet one single subjective physical criteria is pretty stupid, in my opinion. Heavy emphasis on that last part, in my opinion. But yeah, attraction's important. Definitely. Be willing to compromise and rethink certain types of partners in terms of like the physical type and but yeah, have a type that's okay. Be attracted to people. Let that potentially filter who you want to get to know. These are all perfectly fine things. It's okay to be attracted to people and want to get to know someone because you thought they were attractive first. That's the basis of a lot of relationships. Most relationships actually started from an unspoken physical attraction. The overwhelming majority of modern relationships began this way. And so I'm not trying to say that that doesn't play a role or that it's not important. But don't live by a binary set of subjective standards simply because you feel like you deserve to be with a certain type of person. Again, every tall guy you've ever dated wasn't good enough to be your husband because he's not around anymore. So that's not the only thing worth selecting dates over. And seriously think about what qualities you want in a partner or a spouse. Maybe arrange your social life to be around people who might potentially display those qualities. You may actually have to go somewhere new. Take that invite to a small group you've been putting off, or simply introduce yourself to someone you find interesting or attractive. Sure, having the guy take initiative always sounds great, but that straight up might not be how it works for you. So don't let a great potential partner not know you because you didn't approach them. I'm not saying you have to do this, but be open to it. There's nothing wrong with making a decision to go after what you want. And if he's the right guy for you, he'll respect you for it and he won't have a problem with it at all. But don't, fall into this weird pressure trap of, I would, never date a guy if I had to approach him first. Cool. I mean, you might not date a guy then. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what types of people are attracted to you. I'm sure it's more than you think. You're probably awesome, but we live in a different world than we used to. And I don't know. You might have to reach out to someone. You might have to approach someone. You might have to ask someone for coffee. It's okay. At the end of the day, would you rather have a relationship with a great guy that you end up loving because you had to ask him to coffee first, or continue to wonder when Mr. Right's going to show up because you decided that you were never going to make the first move? I don't know. It's not up to me to tell you what to do, but I do want to give you some things to think about. And I definitely think that that's something worth thinking about. So I will say that, again, in my opinion, some more advice would be avoid having hard preferences based on a person you have no idea exists or not. So an example of that would be like making statements like, well, my ideal man would never blank, or my future husband will always blank. Newsflash, there's a chance your future spouse will exhibit certain behaviors that you don't necessarily care for when you first meet or start dating. And they may not, they may be perfectly fine. That's great. But there's a good chance that you're going to meet someone and there's going to be things about them that, you might wish are a little different. And obviously they're not deal breakers, but as you date, people evolve and people change. So be willing to give them that space and, give them a chance to adjust to your dynamic and change things about themselves as they grow. That doesn't mean compromise on your values or your standards, but be realistic that the person you end up with is likely going to be as imperfect as you, and they're going to be trying to give you space to evolve in your relationship as well. So just again, a lot of these points are going to be, kind of resolved to me being like, well, be willing to compromise. I think that's the basis of a lot of relationships is being willing to compromise. And so I will say that I think relationships are built on trust. I think that they evolve through compromise. So definitely, keep that in mind. So I talked about Lauren's audio message. We will move on to Joe's audio message now. So the question that I had in my notes was, how do you get relationships to last? And that was a question that was prompted by an audio message that Joanna sent over. This is the most Joanna story ever. She reached out and she was like, hey, I was on the phone with a customer service rep and she and I got on the topic of talking about dating and relationships. I think Joanna mentioned something about being pregnant and, married for a long time. And I think that kind of like spurred this conversation. Sorry, Joe, if I don't remember the details exactly, but basically she was like, I was on hold with this customer service rep for something that I was calling about. Or like I was waiting to hear back on something, and me and this girl were just chatting, and she was like in her 20s, and she said the most Joanna thing she was like, "Don't worry, I prayed with her on the phone. Everything's gonna be great." And so I laughed so hard whenever she told me that, and I mean that in the best way. Like this, legitimately, like the greatest thing ever. I love that. Please don't ever change, Joanna. But this girl basically was kind of talking to Joe about like, I can't get relationships to last more than a couple of months, and they were kind of chatting through that. And Joanna basically said, like, I think it'd be interesting to kind of hear your take on that. Not say it's going to be a good one, but, here's my response to the question of how do you get relationships to last? I said it just a minute ago. Relationships are built on trust. You absolutely cannot sustain without it. I would go so far as to say that would apply to any relationship, no matter what kind of relationship you have with any person on this earth. I think that the core of that relationship has to be some type of trust. Otherwise, it has a shelf life. It's got an expiration date. So it's perfectly fine and healthy to disagree and have differences of opinion, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual trust in your partner because of the relationship you both work to develop. So one way that you can ensure that your relationship lasts is communicating. Communicate early, communicate often, communicate openly and honestly. That means don't wait for your partner to quote unquote figure it out if something's wrong. If it's important, bring it up and discuss it when you can. You're not trying to, teach them a lesson. You're trying to maintain authenticity and grow together. So you might have to bring a bunch of stuff up from time to time. That sucks. It's not fun. It's not fun to have to remind your husband to do the same thing over and over and over again. But, with any luck, you've ended up with someone who's willing to learn and change to meet your needs instead of just meeting their own. And sometimes that means just simply being aware. There's a lot of people that just like, you don't know what you don't know. And relationships are about learning and about growth. And so, if the person that you're dating or married to or in a relationship with in any way is unaware of something that is difficult for you, make them aware of it and give them some grace. You might need to bring it up more than once. Schedule time to check in with one another. You heard me correctly. Schedule. Big emphasis on that. And here's why. So I'll tell you about something that my wife and I do. We have done this thing called check-ins, and we've done them for a long time, for years. And basically what it is it's a time that you put on the calendar. We did once a week. We picked a day of the week that's worked. Over the years, we've had to change days of the week to just kind of meet our our family life better. And we've gone through periods of time where we haven't done it for a while. We've gone through periods of time where we've done it super consistently and everything in between. But it has been, a very consistent part of our marriage for several years. And basically what it means is that you put time on the calendar for you two to check in with one another. If there's anything that you feel like you want to bring up to the person that you're in a relationship with, that's important to talk to them, and it can wait, then this is the time for that. This is the place for that. Obviously, if it's serious, you need to bring it up in the moment, whatever, that's fine. You'll be the judge of that. But if there are things that can wait, or if there's something that's bothering you, something that you take note of or whatever, this is the space for that. This is the time to bring that up. So it's not you're going to sit down, I'm going to air my grievances with you kind of thing. If there's any Seinfeld fans, it's not it's not the Costanza, I got a lot of problems with you people and you're going to hear about it. It's not that, even though that would be awesome. But it definitely is a place for you to be able to safely talk about what's been on your heart and what's been bothering you to the person that you're in a relationship with. You don't have to be married to do this. So if you are trying to build consistency and trust in your relationship, obviously communication plays a huge role in that. And this is a type of communication that you can have a lot of control and structure around. And it's actually really cool because it takes a lot of pressure off of feeling when like the right time to bring something up is. So put it on the calendar, pick a day of the week, and each of you gets to go one at a time, and the other person sits silently and does not interrupt. Doesn't respond to anything as you're speaking, doesn't defend themselves, doesn't offer a correction or an excuse or an answer. You simply listen. You simply sit there and you listen to your partner tell you everything that they want to tell you, and you let them say it in their own words. You let them say it in their own time. You let them say it in their own way, and you just accept that, and you absorb it, you receive it, you give them grace and respect, and you give them space and let them speak to you how they want to speak to you about the things that have been on their heart, and just listen. Do not interrupt. This is not the time for it to be a back and forth at all. So the way that this works, though, is that if your partner understands that there's a loving and a respectful way to bring things up that's bothering them, obviously don't come in guns blazing. If you're the person that's starting, understand that you're also talking to another human being that you are trying to share your life with. So don't just come in super hot and accusatory. That's another reason why the schedule helps, because a lot of the times if we want to respond to things in the moment, we're a little bit more emotional about it. And if we have time and space away from that situation, we can collect our thoughts and we can talk about it more calmly and more practically. So there's a lot of reasons why scheduling these check-ins helps a ton. It just puts boundaries around our raw feelings as people. So speak honestly with one another, speak respectfully and lovingly to one another, but give each other space. And, the first person can go, open up and kind of talk. And then when you're kind of wrapping up, there's two things that we like to do and to say. And one of them is saying something that you did that wasn't very helpful for your partner, and then saying something that your partner did that was helpful for you. And so it's putting this emphasis, I think, on humility of saying like, hey, I brought forth all the things that have been on my heart this week, and I brought them up to you, and I just wanted you to know about them. And I'm going to finish my time by saying something that I did that wasn't very helpful for you. And I'm taking ownership over that, and I'm acknowledging that I could have done better to be there for you this week. And then I also want to bring something up that I felt was really amazing that you did for me, that helped me. And so it de-emphasizes what we're trying to gain, and it emphasizes what we're trying to give. And it also allows the other person to hear us take responsibility, and it allows them to hear us give them acknowledgement and praise for the things that we, felt were meaningful that they did for us. So that is kind of like the basic framework of a check-in, at least how we did it. I'm sure there's other ways to do it that will meet your needs differently, but try it out. It's a really amazing way to be able to speak. And if you've never done something like that before, it's actually pretty awesome just sitting and knowing that you can speak freely and the other person's not going to interrupt you. And that works well for both of you. And so again, don't take advantage of that time and just steamroll your partner. Be respectful and be loving in those moments. But yeah, it's super cool being able to speak, knowing that you can just speak freely. Your partner is going to absorb that and receive it and do their best to work on the things that you brought up. And then on the flip side, just sitting and listening and having someone be honest with you and you having to just sit in that. It's a really amazing time. So, so schedule check-ins. The next point I had about helping, your relationships last is, not basing your standards on other people's successes and failures. You're working toward your own relationship, so avoid comparing it to others. Remember, comparison is the thief of joy. That is a very common saying, but it's important and it's true. So don't base your standards off of other people's relational success or failure. It's super easy to do. Not saying that you can't learn from other people. I'm not saying that you can't take from other people. I just gave you a huge piece of advice that I hope that you all try out that my wife and I do. That's awesome. But don't base your standards of the quality of your relationship solely on other people's success and failure. The next one was another one that Joanna touched on, and it is setting a boundary to not have sex and communicate why you're holding off. So it's a big one. If you're a non-believer, obviously there's probably a lot of different opinions you'll have about this, and you don't have the same beliefs that believers do about why we abstain from sex before marriage. And that's okay. No judgment. If you're not a believer and you have different opinions about that, that's okay. We can talk about that. But specifically for believers, if you are in a relationship or if you're dating someone or potentially want to date someone and you want to make sure that your relationship is formed around trust and lasts, then set a boundary to not have sex and communicate why you set that boundary. You can learn a lot about your potential partner's motives and expectations for a relationship if you set physical boundaries from the start. We had like a really good friend of ours. I'll try and tell the story quickly because we're already going like super long on this episode. But we had a really good friend of ours that dated this guy off and on for several months. And she's amazing. She's such an encouraging person. She's super positive. And she is such an amazing person of faith. And we love having her be part of our life. And we were really sad for her whenever she told us the story about this dude that she had dated for a while, but also like super proud of her. So she set boundaries early on in the relationship about what she was unwilling to do physically with this guy. And it was kind of off and on, hot and cold. And there were periods of time where this dude was just like, I think that's amazing, super respectful. And they would date for a little while. And then he would try to move forward and try and do something physically with her. And she would be like, hey, what are you doing? And he'd be like, oh, well, I just thought that, blah, blah, blah. Things have been going well, whatever. She's like, yeah, no, that's awesome. Things are going great. Boundary's still there though. I don't know what changed or why you thought it changed. She's pretty matter of fact too. And so she said it like super similarly to that, which is also what I think is amazing about it. Cause she's just like, yeah, no, things are great. You're right. This is awesome. Didn't change my boundaries though. So don't know what you're doing. And, so it was a lot of that. It was a lot of back and forth. It was a lot of this dude being like, you know what, I really respect you. And I was intimidated. I've never been with someone that respected themselves like that before. And it just threw me off. And so like, I really care about you though. And like, I think that your decision to withhold from this is awesome. Like, I want to be with you because I think you're amazing. And they dated again for, and then he, tried to cross the boundary again. And she was just like, all right, dude, this is, and every time she stood up for herself, she was really firm and she was really, she was just really secure in that decision. And she was secure in where that decision was coming from, why she was making it. And so it was awesome. I mean, like, it sucks to have to go through that. And I know that she definitely didn't enjoy that. But it's also a really amazing story about someone who was perfectly fine setting a boundary and protecting that boundary. Absolutely. And so, being willing to lose a relationship with someone who just habitually will not respect your boundaries and your choices that's a hard thing to do, but it's important. And you have to ask yourself if you're willing to do that. Your boundaries are important. So a lot of believers are dating and having sex, and to be honest with you, it might be working out fine for them by their own standards, but that's not a good enough reason to change your values and your commitment to honoring your faith. And notice how I said it's working out fine for them by their standards. Just because there don't appear to be anything, or appear to be any problems or anything going on or anything wrong, doesn't mean that that's not contributing to this like foundation that's being laid of like future problems that they're going to have, that they might have, And so don't look at other believers who are like sleeping together and seem to be holding it together and seem to be fine. Like, even if there's like no real problems that are surfacing in their lives at this moment, like that's not how God has called us to live. And that's not the life that you agreed to whenever you said that you were going to be a believer and that you were going to honor your faith. And so again, it's important to respect that boundary and to understand why. As a believer, there's a reason why we're asked to abstain from sex until marriage. No, it's not cool by today's standards. It's not easy to do. It's definitely not convenient. It's not fun. Just gonna be real with you. Sex is awesome. It was designed that way. Sex is amazing. It's one of the best things that we could have ever been given as people. And that's why it's worth protecting and valuing over whatever you may think someone else wants from you. Trust that God knows more than you about patience and desire. It's okay. Sex is not everything. Sex is amazing. Sex is not everything. And there's a reason why we're asked to wait. So I will say this very practically about communication in relationships. If a guy starts talking to you about all the great things you'll have in your relationship if you start sleeping together, he's probably already made up his mind that your relationship isn't capable of having those things without sex. Don't start negotiating. Don't start compromising. Demand respect from your partner and be okay if they don't like that. Be willing to stand up and lose a date or a relationship because your values aren't respected. Don't listen to some, soapbox or some speech or some, whatever that someone wants to give you about why they think your relationship will be perfectly fine and great and even better if you start sleeping together. Cool. Yeah, it definitely will be in marriage. But that's not the type of life that you agreed to live as a believer. And so as someone who is not married, you need to understand that you are perfectly capable and perfectly fine saying no to that, not negotiating, and defending and respecting your boundaries based on the type of faith that you want to have and respect. So you might be tempted to think, this is something that's really common. You might be tempted to think, oh, well, he's so great in every other way and will probably get married no matter what. Well, if he's so great and if he's meant to be your husband, he'll respect your boundaries without negotiating with you. Period. If he doesn't respect your boundaries and decisions while you're dating, that's not something marriage is going to solve. If anything, it'll get worse. So again, I have said this so many times already. Respect your own boundaries and be willing to make other people respect your boundaries. The next question that came in was how to date in your 30s. Yeah, so I'm in my 30s and I'm not dating. I am married. And my wife and I still go on dates. I don't want it to sound like that. You know what I mean. It's different. By the time I got into my 30s, I had already been married for a while. So I don't know what it's like to be in this situation, but I have a lot of friends who do, and we've talked a lot about it. And I have a few things that I hope will be really encouraging. So honestly, all the aforementioned advice is appropriate, regardless of when you enter the dating pool or when you're dating or your age or whatever. Just know that everyone's life evolves and grows at a different pace. You are no better or worse than anyone else because you're not in a relationship or married. What is meant for you is worth waiting for and protecting. So please don't start looking for ways to settle simply because you feel like you should be married or should be dating at this point in your life. Be patient. Your life isn't worth rushing just because someone else happened to find what you want sooner than you did. That's going to be the case for as long as we live. It's okay. Enjoy your time and make sure you're also spending it cultivating the things that you're bringing to the table. This is where the accountability part of the episode comes in. I think I mentioned that forever ago whenever I started this episode. The type of guy that's good enough for you to end up with probably has a similar set of standards that he wants in his wife. So work on yourself, and it may change the type of person that's attracted to you. That's a pretty unfun thing to hear, but it's also a pretty honest thing to hear. And if you actually interact with that from a point of encouragement and positivity, then you'll understand like what you're asking other people to do to bring their end of the things to the table in the relationship that you want. What are you bringing to the table? What type of person are you, turning yourself into so that the type of person that you find that you finally deem good enough for you to be with, what type of person are they getting? You have all these standards and you have all these things that you wrote down that are super important to you that you're not going to compromise on. They might have those things too. And so what are you bringing to the table? Because any person that is worth you spending your life with is worth getting the best version of who you are. So think about that and don't be discouraged by it. This is not a tipping off point for you to think of everything that you think is wrong with you. That's not the point of that at all. But we can always be working towards, being better versions of ourselves. And that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And you ultimately will find what that looks like for you. But what are you doing to turn yourself into someone that is going to be amazing for the person that you find that's good enough for you to be with? So, that might be an unfun way to wrap up the episode, but I tried to make it encouraging. But who are we if we're not taking responsibility for our own life and working to be better? And not just better by our standards, but by God's standards. And last, I promise, but not least, give yourself some grace. You really are doing your best and you're trying. So just trust that you'll be provided for in this way, just as you're provided for in every other way. God loves you and he wants great things for you. Just make sure to spend time in the Word and spend time in prayer so that you're orienting your desires alongside God's desires. You'll be okay. I promise. I would really love to do a part 2 on this episode, even though this one was like way, way longer than I intended and probably longer than it needed to be. But please send in questions or comments if you have them. You can reach out to me directly on Instagram. My Instagram is just Kyle Blaine, KYLEBLAINE. Anything that you want to reach out to me directly for, I will share with Joanna and Lauren. I'll include them. I'll let you know the comments that you had, the questions that you had, and I'll include them in that process and let you know their responses as well. But as always, hitting them up directly is the best way to do that. So email them at wildandbeautifulpodcast@gmail.com. Buy Joe and Lauren a coffee. I've been informed pregnant women can have caffeine. I was talking to my wife about it today, actually, and she was like, well, you can't have like multiple cups, but like you can have caffeine. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. So now more than ever, buy those two, I'm assuming very tired, very pregnant women a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/WBpod. That'll go a long way to supporting the show and letting them know that you want to create a space for them to continue to provide more content for y'all. And subscribe on YouTube, just Wild and Beautiful. But apologies for the longer episode. I know that the guest host episodes were going to be a little shorter, and this one's like basically double the length of the last ones that have been coming out. But thanks for being here. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're encouraged. And again, reach out. If you have questions, comments, I would love to hear them. I would love to continue to interact with you all on this topic in particular and then future topics. But until then, have a great weekend. I hope you have meaningful engagements with people in your life and you have meaningful interactions and conversations and you are all safe. And I hope you all feel valued and I hope you all feel loved. And I hope you all have one amazing conversation this week that, someone says something to you that you didn't expect and it just turns your whole weekend around and it changes your perspective on something. I truly hope that happens. That's been happening to me. It's been happening to me more and more, and it's been amazing. And so I hope that happens for you. So I'm going to wrap and I'm going to move on. I'm going to do my best to have a great weekend. I wish the same to you. I'll see y'all soon.